One of the things we know for sure is that air travel is the safest way to travel. It's safer than driving in a car, it's safer than walking, it's safer than riding a bicycle, it's safer than a ship. It's actually the safest way to travel in public transportation. It's safer than a bus, safer than a jeepney, it's safer than just about any other transportation that we actually could choose to embark on. And it's for that reason that 99% of the clients who come to see us for fear of flying are coming to see us for an irrational fear of flying. What I mean by an irrational fear of flying is they've developed a fear of flying, but it really isn't based on their own experience. It's not based on previous trauma. It's not based on a previous plane crash, or it's not based on vicarious PTSD where they witnessed a plane crash or something of that sort, or had a close friend or relative who died in an air tragedy. Now, there are a couple exceptions to this, though, and they will come our way on occasion. And the best preparation that you can have for fear of flying when it comes to dealing with those who have experienced trauma in the past is to become an expert in trauma-based therapies. That is a whole new course in and of itself. But because I recognize that some of us will, on rare occasion, have somebody who doesn't have an irrational fear of flying, but has developed a rational fear of flying based on previous negative experience associated with surviving a plane crash, or being the close relative to someone who has died in a crash, or has been a witness to an air tragedy, I want to include a segment here at least that can give you some ideas that can be truly helpful to you. But again, the skills that we would use in really any trauma resolution are the skills then we would bring into hypnosis when we have somebody with a rational fear of flying based on previous experiences. Now, that being said, a rational fear of flying is actually an even more irrational fear of flying, in that the odds of being in 2 plane crashes are exponentially minimal. So the reality is, as I said to one client once who did survive a plane crash in a single engine plane, when they were the passenger, I said to them, well, the good news here is that statistically you're not due for an entire another lifetime. I've heard it said that in order to be involved in a plane crash, you'd actually have to get on a plane the day you were born. And you'd have to remain on the plane nonstop, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for 86 years before you would ever be in an aircraft incident. So I actually did tell one of my clients, well, the good news here is statistically, you're not due again. We only have one lifetime. And to deal with previous trauma, though, by attempting to provide rational statistics really doesn't cut it. So what can we do in our hypnosis sessions if the person we are dealing with does present with this? One, we should be prepared far beyond this continuing education course and have skills in trauma resolution. Number 2, anytime a person has experienced a trauma, there is probably decay of memory and inaccuracy of memory. And hypnotists seem to have as a core theory, let's go back and try to remember and put all those pieces together. I'm a believer that I shouldn't charge my client good money to help them relive the misery of the past if they're fortunate enough to actually forget those pieces. That was really important because that pertains specifically to sexual abuse trauma, and I've seen many hypnotists trying to help clients to recall the misery of their previous experiences, and there's really no empirical evidence that shows us the best way to deal with trauma is to have a person relive their trauma. Many years ago, it's been more than 2 decades, I was a young substance abuse counselor and I worked with other therapists on a treatment team. One of those therapists was a certified psychodrama specialist, and she would have all the patients come in and she would literally do these 3 or 4 hour therapy sessions where they would relive psychodrama, their psychological trauma, their physical traumas. And it was very unsettling to me. These people were revivifying and reliving the previous traumas, and I couldn't see and couldn't understand in any way how this could actually benefit the client. And to this day, I'm still not a big fan of having people to relive their traumas. That being said, Some of our clients will come to us and they'll say, I had this traumatic experience and I find myself enmeshed with it. I find myself in the middle of it. I even think about getting on a plane ticket and the computer screen disappears in front of me when I'm trying to buy a ticket. And all I remember is, the thud of the plane crashing and the explosion of fuel and people trying to get out the door, and I can see myself. And so they're literally describing the experience that they had as if they were in that experience once again. Clients will present to us in what is called in NLP the first perceptual position. Them as themselves in the middle of trauma. And this is a perceptual position that is actually unhealthy. The goal of mindfulness is to put some space between me and my thoughts, or me and my emotions, or me and my physical experiences. When clients come to us and they say they are reliving their previous traumas, these are not traumas that they've forgotten or can't recall, but traumas that are intrusive visually, intrusive cognitively in their thoughts, intrusive emotionally, just with either conscious or subconscious cues. What we want to do is we want to work with them in a process that can help them to put some space between them and their thoughts, or them and their emotions, or them and their feelings. And many of the clients who've experienced trauma, whenever they think about the previous trauma or confront the previous trauma, air crash in this case, see themselves and experience it again as if they are reliving it, that first perceptual position. What they don't know how to do is they don't know how to step back and see their previous experience from a distance. And the reason why it's valuable to see the previous experience from a distance is their safety. I got away. I escaped the disaster. When I see myself as if I'm watching the trauma on TV, it's a level of dissociation. I have stepped back from it physically. I'm no longer at physical risk. Maybe I've even stepped back from it emotionally because I can process the experience in different ways. Physically, when I view it as if it's on TV, as if I'm an observer of the situation I really did experience previously in life, well then emotionally I can respond to it in different ways as well. I can put some space between me and my emotions. So I train clients who have previous traumas specifically in mindfulness. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is what it's called. I use the techniques of acceptance and commitment therapy, the techniques of mindfulness-based stress reduction. Some of those I've already previously taught parts of here in this course, whether I use those labels or not. Those are some terms you can Google. If you are working with trauma, I would really suggest learning mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction as tools for helping people to overcome trauma. And acceptance and commitment therapy, you can Google that as well, is another approach that is truly useful. In fact, all of these are approaches that Kelly Woods and I wrote extensively about in our book titled Reframing Hypnotherapy, which I also alluded to earlier. But here's the process I use with clients when they come in my office and they say, I've had this trauma and I can't separate myself from it, so I can't buy a plane ticket, I can't get on a plane, I can't do it because of this previous trauma. In the session, and you can pretend you're my client, okay? When you watch this video, I'll talk to you as if you're my client. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to recall the trauma, the event, the scenario. You told me that you were in a plane crash or you witnessed a plane crash. And go ahead with your eyes open in the safety of my office. Just recall the fact of that experience occurring in life. Are you able to do that? Or get an affirmative, yes, I'm able to do that. I am not going to lead and ask people to come up with more details than what their details are. Are you seeing flames? Are you feeling heat? Do you feel like your chest is about to explode? I don't want to ask those leading questions. I want them to simply experience it any way they are. And my simply asking this question, are you able to recall this trauma in the safety of this chair in my office, in this place? The answer is yes. Now I'm dealing with what my client's memory and experience and reality is. I'm not digging into the subconscious trying to find pieces they missed or put them into place or even make sense out of them. One of the things I never do with my trauma clients is help them make sense out of why do bad things happen to good people. I mean, this has been a theological question for the ages. Throughout human history, we've been trying to figure out why do babies burn in fires, and why do loved ones die in plane crashes, and why do ships full of vacationers sink in the Bermuda Triangle. We'll never know the answer to why good or bad things happen to good people. And it's really not our place in hypnotherapy to try to come up with a justification for why good things. One of my pet peeves in life, when I was in high school, I had a lot of trauma. My dad died, my best friend died, I experienced other death and loss. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on that year. One of the youth pastors quoted a Bible verse. He said to me, all things work together for good to those who love God, so there must be some divine purpose in this, and that's why you're suffering and miserable. I rejected that answer. By the way, so did Job back in the Old Testament. His 3 friends came along and explained why he lost his camels, why his family died, why his lands were barren, and why he lost his fortune. The whole point of the book of Job is not why do bad things happen to good people. The whole point of the book of Job is summed up when the young guy comes along at the end, sees Job sitting on his log with his 3 deadbeat friends who tried to explain why these bad things happened to Job. And he basically said, hey, there's something bigger going on than we understand. Now, I'm condensing the entire book of Job into 30 seconds here. But the right answer was sometimes we just don't know. This is why an approach like acceptance and commitment therapy can be very helpful. Acceptance does not imply that I like something or that I'm glad something happened or that I find meaning in suffering. Acceptance simply means I'm present, I'm in this chair, I acknowledge that there was this experience. I didn't like it, it was scary, I'm devastated, I have grief. We're not trying to get rid of those things. Those are a part of a person's experience, and so I let them just be with their trauma. Are you able to recall it? Yes. So I also want to ask them a question. In the safety of and I want to keep pointing out, in the safety of this office, okay, because this office is a safe place, you're able to recall the trauma. Would you like to move forward and put some space between you and the trauma? Get consent to work with them. Yes, I want to put some space, Richard, between me and the trauma. Great. Go ahead and close your eyes down. And with your eyes closed down, so the first thing is recall the trauma. Second thing is open the eyes, reorient them, get consent to go further. The third here is to have our client bring themselves back to the experience, once again, that first perceptual position. Go ahead and close your eyes down and bring yourself back to the place of when you experienced that trauma. I know it's probably uncomfortable to do so, but you're in the safety of my office and I am with you. So allow yourself a moment to be in that place of trauma, of difficulty. And open your eyes, open your eyes. And what we're doing when we're opening the eyes is we're giving them a mental, emotional break. We're putting some space between them. We're literally teaching them that they have the ability to be in trauma and to reorient to the present. And right now we're safe. You able to do that? Yes, great. Then go ahead and close your eyes down again. And in this scenario, we're going to move to what's called a second perceptual position. I want you to move away from the trauma, to put some literal distance between you and that trauma, between you and, in this case, the plane crash. I want you to see yourself on the edge of the airport or the edge of the field or from some other safe place, some other vantage point, observing the scene in front of you. Do you notice what the difference here is? Instead of being in the middle of the trauma, I'm back, but I'm still present with the trauma. Second perceptual position, me observing me in the trauma. That's some space some safety between me and the trauma. And take a moment and see yourself as if you are an observer on the outside of this trauma. You're not at risk. But see the trauma occurring. See the experience happening. Feel the emotions that are being felt in that scenario, in that situation. But doing it from the safety of 100 yards away. The edge of the airfield. Whatever the scenario is. Are you able to do that? Yes. Do you notice that it feels different to be on the edge of the disaster rather than in the middle of the disaster? Maybe you can even see yourself from this vantage point in that scenario. Maybe you can even see yourself that moment, because they're not dead, they're actually in our office, that moment that you were safe. That moment, the safety was clear. I know you in the middle of the trauma, you didn't know that safety was going to be there. And maybe everybody wasn't safe. But there was a moment when you were safe. Can you see that from this distance? Yes. Now go ahead, open your eyes. Again, we're putting with the open eyes, we're teaching people the skill of being able to control these scenes. And now we're going to move to third perceptual position. One of the ways that I've done this is simply with a visualization. Imagine yourself at home watching TV of the experience. You're removed completely from the experience. You're watching it as if you are an observer from a far distant vantage point. And go ahead and close your eyes down now and see that trauma from the TV here in my office. There's always a TV in my office. Imagine that a film is playing of that trauma. And notice something, how it feels different to be an observer from far beyond the edge of the trauma and from a safe vantage point in a different building, in a different city, in a different place. And although it feels sad, or although there's loss, or although there's anger, do you notice a difference in the way that you feel as an observer on the TV screen than you did when you first came into my office, sitting in this chair, and experienced it as if you were in the trauma at the moment? Yes, I do, they will almost always say. Great, go ahead and open your eyes again. Let my clients know then that the solution to dealing with these intrusive mental visual imageries is to at any time close their eyes and to move back from the scenario when they find themselves enmeshed with the experience of the trauma in that first perceptual position, to try moving to an outside position and being an observer in that second perceptual position, or to move back even further, where they're an observer of the observers. And then when I reorient them, or sometimes while they're still with the eyes closed, I'll let them know that although the past is the past, and it really did occur, as they recall it occurring, they have the ability at any time to take a snapshot of that moment that they were able to step into safety and to step back from the situation and to put some space between them and the accident. And even though it's been many months or many years, it can sometimes feel like we're in the middle of that scenario. But by coming here today, you were able to literally bring yourself from that trauma and into the joy of flying. And so my encouragement to you is to bring yourself afar from that distressing situation and into the power of this moment anytime you need to, by putting some space between you and your thoughts, you and your emotions, and you and your sensations. Again, this is one tool, but it's a tool I have used with those who've had, again, vicarious PTSD, the trauma or tragedy of loved ones or others they've been in close proximity to. Sometimes veterans have experienced this. People who've experienced trauma because they've they've actually experienced an air disaster, or a person who's been an observer or first responder on the scene of such a scenario. And those are folks who we may encounter and deal with as well. Again, I view this course as a comprehensive course in fear of flying, and I hope that this scenario has been helpful to you. But again, these are the least likely of clients to come to us for fear of flying. Rarely is it a rational fear of flying based on previous experiences. Almost all of our clients are going to come to us because of irrational fear of flying. They've never experienced previous trauma.